All right, let's go ahead and get this kicked off. So welcome again. My name is Ted Brown. I'm the Director of Product Management here at Ntiva. And I'm again going to be your host for the Microsoft Menu webinar for the April 2022 Q2 kickoff. So today I've kind of got a spreadsheet, webinar to talk about Azure Virtual Desktop. If you've been a part of any of the webinars this past year, kind of highlight this one as one I'm looking forward to. And I'm definitely excited to be able to talk to you about the advantages of Azure Virtual Desktop because I've been a big fan of it since it's come out from Microsoft. So for the agenda today, so we're going to cover the introduction, some key terms, Azure Virtual Desktop components, which comprise of it, how does it work, and then also get into some comparisons of how it differentiates itself from remote desktop services or Windows 365, which was just announced back in October, and what's the advantage of each one, and as well as get into a demo to kind of show you what it looks like to give you a little more experience of how we manage it and how we can deploy it and some potential offerings we can do for businesses. And before we do any of this, I want to make sure that just let you know that this is still in beta for Ntiva for launching. We have a couple of clients running it just to make sure we have the appropriate methods of supporting it. So what we're putting out here right now is kind of a taste of what's to come. I'm hoping we'll be able to launch this out in the later stages of Q2, Q3 amongst the masses, because I do feel that this will be a displacement of how we're currently doing remote systems for companies, being able to augment maybe how you're using remote desktop services today, if it makes sense going in that direction. And a little bit of housekeeping before we officially kick this off. So please use the Q&A for any and all questions. And like past webinars, I'm happy to answer any questions about anything you have for the previous webinars we've covered. So in January, I did the Microsoft Windows NCE licensing increases and what that means to businesses. We had a webinar for Windows 11 in February, and then some Outlook tips and tricks. So happy to answer any and all questions for my old webinars, especially anything with this pertaining to Azure Virtual Desktops. Just use that Q&A section and then we'll answer them all at the end. So for some key terms, so I'm going to get into some acronyms that you'll see out there if you're doing any searches for Azure Virtual Desktop. The first one is AVD. So it's definitely been the key term and acronym used for Azure Virtual Desktops. And I'll get a little bit more into what that means. The other one that you'll see is WVD, Windows Virtual Desktop. Windows Virtual Desktop and Azure Virtual Desktop are pretty much one and the same. When Azure originally came out with the ability to do desktop provisioning within Azure systems, it was called Windows Virtual Desktop. They had a different way of being able to provision the systems, and they made a change to that in, I believe, the 2021 update or spring update, which made it a little bit easier to distribute and provision and manage. And once they did that, they changed it to Azure Virtual Desktop. So if you ever do some searches on the internet, you'll still come across WVD. They're pretty much one and the same. AVD, WVD, same thing of being able to provision desktops within Azure systems. The next piece here is RDS and RDP. So RDS is remote desktop services. This is the capability of being able to remote into a server from maybe your home office to a corporate office, or maybe into a hosted infrastructure system, maybe in Azure today or Oracle or AWS. And that's typically done by remote desktop services. And there's components to make it work. You have pretty much your remote desktop server, which has the applications on it. Then you have a secure gateway, a licensing server, maybe a secure gateway, as well as a web access system. So there's a whole bunch of different kind of components to comprise of this remote desktop service to give you the ability to log into it. And that brings me to RDP. Now, RDP is the protocol that allows the computer to connect into the RDS systems. And so sometimes you see them kind of presented one and the same, RDP and RDS. The next piece is VDI. I don't talk about VDI in this presentation too much, but you do see that when you start searching on some key terms for desktop virtualization. I usually see this with Citrix systems, and maybe you'll see it with like a persistent desktop or a non-persistent desktop for VDI. Persistent being a one-to-one relationship between the user and the virtual desktop that's housed somewhere with Citrix, either on-prem or maybe in the cloud. And then you have the non-persistent desktop, which would be a desktop that spins up when the person logs in and then spins down from what's called a golden image. And there's some kind of key similarities with Azure Virtual Desktop and a VDI instance, and I'll talk about that. And it comes really together with how you manage the image, that golden image, which I think is the key part of talking about how the industry is moving when looking at the future of remote desktop services, going to Azure Virtual Desktop or Windows 365, all comes down to how you handle the image. And the last piece of the key terminology is Windows 365. Now, Microsoft likes to have some similar names out there to confuse people. They had Office 365 and they had Microsoft 365. Please don't confuse Windows 365 with Office 365 and Microsoft 365. Windows 365 is the ability to actually deliver a desktop from the Microsoft platform, similar to what you do in Azure Virtual Desktop. Now I'll get into some nuances of how it's different from Azure Virtual Desktop, but it's the same way of being able to purchase a license like you do today for, say, an Office 365 E3 license, or maybe a Microsoft Business Premium license. You can buy a subscription, one license, for a Windows 365 desktop, have the ability to log into a remote system. So they're kind of similar, but there are some differences in some definitely some business decisions when making a decision, either going to Azure Virtual Desktop and Windows 365. So let's get into the components of Azure Virtual Desktop. So I think this is a kind of a nice little chart here, kind of gives a little snapshot of what's comprised of the different systems within Azure Virtual Desktop. So what you'll have here on the left side of this graph is the RDB client. So you have the ability to remote into Azure Virtual Desktop with a PC, a Mac, a handheld, an iPad. So that's just the client coming into it. Now, the middle part of this is what's actually all managed and owned by Microsoft in the Azure system. So this is all something that we no longer have to manage as a managed service provider, maybe a client's doing this on their own. This is basically just classified as a service that Azure is hosting for you, utilizing this Azure Virtual Desktop. That comprises of a web access, a secure gateway, a connection broker, and any diagnostics you're running on the system. That leaves the MSP or the client to handle. Again, I mentioned before the image of making sure that the system is delivered to the person appropriately. On this image will live people's applications or anything along those lines, as well as the desktop it's running on. That's the infrastructure, so the underlying server that has the image to be able to deliver the applications. And then you have the Active Directory that does the governance or the make sure the users have access to it, user creation, and then the user profile, the ability to make sure that people can go from system to system and have that same flexibility, same system, same desktop, same documents, the My Drive or OneDrive, Teams, and they have everything right there within that same profile and jump from profile to profile. So that's all on the client side. Now, with a remote desktop system, all this is still having to be managed by the end user or the MSP. So with that middle box here, we would still have to manage the web access, the secure gateway, the diagnostics, the broker. We'd have to make sure security is on, make sure they're up. And if anything falls down, we're still responsible for making sure they're available so you can access the desktops, access your applications. So it kind of changes the system a little bit. It makes it easier to manage because we no longer have to worry about it because it's presented to us as a service, which definitely makes it easier to manage on Azure Virtual Desktop. Now, I did mention remote desktop systems within that, of how it maybe differentiates from Azure Virtual Desktop one and the other. So for me, some of the key differences are here in this graph, but I have a big one at the top is the Azure Virtual Desktop allows for true Windows 10, Windows 11 OS. So beforehand, with remote desktop servers, systems, you would have a server OS presented to you almost like it is a desktop OS. So you have like a Windows 12, which was actually a Windows 8, or a Windows 12 R2, which is a Windows 8.1. You have a Windows 2016 operating server system that's presented to you as almost like a Windows, well, that was actually the Windows 2016 was the Windows 8.1. Then you get to the 2019 OS server, which would have been the Windows 10 server. So there are some nuances and difference of how they look to the end user. And to me, that's important. So I've been actually provisioning remote desktop systems since about the early 2000s, 2002, 2003, we're using Citrix 2000, and then went to Microsoft XP, Microsoft 2003 to be able to deliver remote desktop services. We no longer need to use Citrix back then because it covered all the aspects needed. We didn't want to have the extra overlaying cost of Citrix. So I've been running remote desktop systems for a while and always getting people used to logging into it And there's always some nuances of why it looked different. It was like, oh, this is an OS system, and we could put different skins and make it look similar, but there's always some nuances of being different. And so I think that's key when you have people trying to embrace new technology. You want to have things that look almost identical to what they're using before. So if they're using a Windows 10 desktop and you build a remote desktop system for them in Azure, you can have exactly look the same as they had before, and being a true Windows 10 device. Now, the other option that I like about it is you can utilize Microsoft 365 licensing for your Windows licensing on the operating system, as well as the RDS license as well. For RDS system, you have purchased these separately, where these can now be included when you purchase Microsoft 365 E3, Microsoft E5, and Microsoft Business Premium with a $22 license right now encapsulates your Windows licensing and your RDS licensing. So you can actually save some costs on the licensing component, because you're already probably paying for that potentially today. And you can go ahead and put that straight into Azure Virtual Desktop and not have to provision or purchase additional licensing when we're moving to a remote system. The other piece in here that I actually like as well is the ability for the Azure Virtual Desktop to support OneDrive and Microsoft 365, Microsoft Outlook indexing. With remote desktop systems, there's always been a kind of a struggle to make sure that searches are done quick, easy for each individual user, because with a remote desktop system, you would have a one-to-many relationship. So you have 15, 20 people logging into a terminal server, and then it would create one big long index for how you want to do searches and make sure that each person can only see certain things within an index through security. And it made it kind of cumbersome and not really usable in some fashions. A lot of people complain about the searching capability within remote desktop systems. Now with Azure Virtual Desktop, each individual person can have their own index. And that's important when it's actually making sure when you're doing searches, it's done fast, it's done quick. You can get to what you need readily available, and it's officially supported within Azure Virtual Desktop. So being able to search is key. I utilize it a lot, especially with the OneDrive, and you can get to instant information quickly. The other piece I think I saved the best for last is Azure Virtual Desktop allows for Teams, camera, and audio redirection functionality straight embedded into the system. If anyone's out there has been used to using remote desktop services, there's always been a challenge throughout the years of doing video redirection. So you try to open up a YouTube video, and it might be kind of like a little bit of degradation on how the screen is actually presenting the video back and forth. It's gotten a lot better over the years. But now with Teams being readily adopted across most companies, people would like to have the ability to utilize Teams and do calling from their desktop. And having to minimize out of your system can be cumbersome and troublesome if you want to keep everything within the virtual system. Now, with Azure Virtual Desktop, you can actually do your calls straight from the remote system. It would be almost like calling it from your regular computer. There are some nuances that they're working on that I just want to make sure to make it apparent. Right now, they don't offer filters in the background, so you can't have this fuzzy background like I have right now, or maybe a logo for Ntiva or whatever company you want to put on the brand or the background of it. But it's something they're focusing on to get that fixed. But for the capability of doing calls between each other with video calls, absolutely can do it. And most importantly, you can do it on PCs and Macs. I've been testing back and forth, and they look great. So I do think it's going to be a key component while people move to Azure Virtual Desktop in the future. Now, how's the differentiation between Windows 365? Like I said, Windows 365 was just announced back in October 2021. Now with Windows 365, it's actually comprised of a control plane. You'll see kind of in the top layer there of Azure Virtual Desktop. They're really in the back end, one and the same. It's just basically the presentation to the end user, as well as how you want to provision the services, which makes the differences. And at the top, I want to kind of get into, you'll have different options here with Windows 365. You can either purchase an enterprise license or a business license. Each one of these are desktops, a one-to-one desktop relationship between the user and the desktop that you order from the license and subscription. With Azure Virtual Desktop, you have the capability of doing a personal, which is a one-to-one relationship. Again, one person can get one computer, or you do what's called a pooled method, which is similar to what you have in remote desktop services, where you have a one-to-many relationship. And for doing cost functionality and make sure that you have the ability to keep your costs low, a one-to-many is still the best way to go. But you have capability within this to make sure that it's flexible enough to make sure you have the resources available when you need it, and then scale up and scale down. And I'll get into that a little bit with the auto scaling. But the fact that you can actually do personalized desktops to individual user is also a key component, because maybe there's some people within your company that you want to have a one-to-one relationships. Maybe the VPs or the president want to always have the same PC every time. No one else want to log into it or have resources that might not be available to them at that moment in time. That user can have a one-to-one relationship where maybe the admin crew or the accounting crew can have more of a three users, 5 users, or 6 users per virtual machine. And those they won't have any degradation of services because you have set up the compute capacity and the memory capacity appropriately, but still you want to take advantage of the cost savings of having that shared resource. And I do think that's very, makes it more flexible of utilizing Azure Virtual Desktop versus the Windows 365. And I do like that word flexible because I really feel with the Windows 365, it makes it more simple, where it's a one-to-one relationship. There's only certain systems you can buy in it, but simple does not always make it best for organizations, because what works for one person might not work for the next company. And that's where I like the flexibility with Azure Virtual Desktop. You can actually create different pools of servers for different aspects of workflow within your organization. So you can actually create a host pool comprised of maybe your accounting functions for your accounting crew. Your admin will need to have access to certain applications. You can create a whole host pool for those. Maybe you want to have a more of a denser relationship of your pools for your admins than you want for your accounting. You can mix and match that and change it on the fly if maybe it doesn't work, because it's all consumption based. And so the more you play with how many relationships between people to machines, you can lower down your consumption ratio and save on cost there, which you can't quite do with the enterprise level or business level of Windows 365. And in truth, when I look at Windows 365 and the business piece of it, I think it's really like a 1, 2, 3 person shop, because it's not true business, because you don't have the ability to manage it appropriately. And I'll get into that just a bit in the next slide, which really takes away where I can see an enterprise company, a small to medium-sized business, needing to actually utilize it. The next piece here that I like is the FS logic to be used for profile management. Now, FS logic is kind of an upgrade from the UPD, user profile system, that allows for the ability to have your desktop map wherever system you go to. And for me, that's important. You want to make sure you have that actual desktop you're utilizing on a daily basis look the same, act the same. You have your icons in different places. You want those icons to be exactly in those different places that make sense to you when you log into the system. And that's where it comes into FS logic. So you can log into all these different systems and your desktop will always follow you, because it's actually basically an image that when you log in, that image gets attached to the desktop or the operating system. And when you log off, it gets detached. So when you log into another system, it will just attach there, and everything that you've been working on is right there, exactly how you had it. So there's no difference of how it all works. So I've really loved and embraced FS Logic since it's come out. It can be used with our remote desktop services, and I do recommend going that fashion, but it can't be used with Windows 365. Now, like I mentioned with Windows 365 Business, really what kind of comes down to is the administration portions of this. How do you administrate the image? So with Windows 365 Business, you'll see here the desktop image Microsoft provided. So you have no capability of actually making sure the image, what is running on the machine, is actually delivered at the time to the user is what's needed for your business functions. Does it have your security on it? Does it have your application on it? Does it have your, how you want to make sure you can your team set up on and things along those lines? So those will often be provisioned and deployed after the fact. So if you deploy 10 of these, it'd be just like setting up a new PC. You actually have to go to each one, log into it, install the applications, make sure it's all set, the user's good to go. And then also the key part is there's no backup that's native to Windows 365. You would actually have to purchase a additional backup solution as a third party to back up those files, back up your desktop. So with Azure Virtual Desktop, it comes comprised with the ability to manage those images. And again, for me, that's a key part of this. And I'll show you during the demo of what you can see on the image side of it, of how you can actually distribute those 2 different host pools and manage that image so it's secure, has the applications you need for the business functions that's being delivered, and is at the correct software level that you want for your users. And that's very important. That way you're not trying to to spin up during the day to spend time trying to configure it for the end users. Oh, last piece here, the auto scaling. Auto scaling, I think, is fantastic in the way to make sure to keep your costs low. So with auto scaling, especially in the pooled fashion, what you can do here is you can set threshold rules, and I'll show you here in the demo in a second, of basically being able to say, hey, I only want to have 5 people log into a server at a time. If you hit the capacity of 5, please spin up another server from that golden image. And if that next one hits more than 5, spin up another one. So the key part I kind of talked about before is, hey, this is all consumption based. So if you're no longer not needing that system at that moment in time, just thinking about after 5 p.m., people start logging off and going home, maybe 6 people are actually utilizing the system. There's no need to have 20 servers or 15 servers or whatever it is that's necessary to run your business up and running at that time. So it gets that scalability of being able to scale up when you're actually working during the day and then scale back down. And you can actually scale down to 0 systems that are running during nighttime. And I love that feature. There's no reason to have infrastructure running in the background, taking dollars away if no one's actually utilizing it. But you might say, hey, Ted, what happens when, Sally or Sam wakes up at 2 in the morning, realize they forgot to do something, need to log in? They can actually log in at that moment in time. And what it will do is it will boot up the remote desktop, the Azure Virtual Desktop system. It might take 2 minutes for it to come up fully, but at that moment in time, it will just kind of wait, then log them in when that system is available, and they're up and running. And then once they get done, they log off, the system realizes that the server's not needed, and it'll boot back down. And then per the rules that we have set up, we can say, hey, at 6 a.m., start booting all the servers to be ready for the 8 o'clock mass, everyone logging in, they can log in there. So you can have 12, 14 hours of whether no one's actually using the system and you're not having to pay for it, especially on the weekend. So it really comes down to saving money, saving cost, and auto scaling is the way to go. This slide right here kind of talks about the end user connectivity and availability. It's relatively the same. I'll show you the icon, what it looks like. It's the same for Windows 365 as it is for Azure Virtual Desktop. Printing is about the same in both of them. You can use redirected client printers, universal print, which I think is nice to have the ability to do a print server within Azure, and network-based connectivity. So basically mapping a network printer directly to the system as well if you have VPN capabilities. Those are available on the Windows 365 Enterprise as well as Azure Virtual Desktop. But again, not in the business. The business is very limited. And the last piece here is just the licensing aspect. How do you license it? I kind of mentioned this a little bit before for the Windows licensing, the Windows 10 Enterprise licensing. That's comprised of using either maybe a Microsoft E3, a Microsoft E5, a Microsoft Business Premium, all in there, or you can buy individual Windows 10 licensings from Microsoft as well. Those are both the same for Azure Virtual Desktop and Windows 365. The compute and storage is the licensing will comprise of the cost for that for Windows 365, where with Azure Virtual Desktop, it's all Azure consumption. Again, compute, you use auto scaling, can really shrink that down because you're not utilizing it 24 hours a day. The other piece to highlight before we do the demo, because it looks like we're at 12:25 already, is the Intune piece. Intune is required for Windows 365, which makes sure that you can actually do auto provisioning of applications if necessary to the system and managing through really the endpoint management with Microsoft 365. So that's where you have to do with the enterprise level. That is optional and can be done within Azure Virtual Desktops. And I definitely could see some needs for utilizing Intune with AVD, especially for auto provisioning applications, making sure you have the latest software there. But it's not necessary and it's optional. And then utilizing Office, both is capable of doing that. So you have your Excel, your Outlook, whatever you need. You can use the Microsoft 365 version of it as well in both of them. And with Azure Virtual Desktop, you can take advantage of the shared activation that's capable with the Microsoft Business Premium, the Microsoft 365 E3, Office E3. So all of them can take care of being able to license Office within each different environment. So with that said, let's get to the demo. So all right, so here's what it looks like for a person logging into Microsoft 365 with Azure Virtual Desktop. So I have an icon right here at the bottom. That will be the same for each one of them. And then when it comes down to a person logging in, they have access to potentially different host pools. So each of these are different host pools. For most organizations, you probably just would have one, maybe two, and they can be different for each person within an organization if you have multiple host pools. So I can click on this icon right here because it's the one I'm utilizing. I demoed this in the Windows 11 one because I've been taking advantage of utilizing this to test out Windows 11. And it pops up here, logging in. And this gets to the desktop that I utilize on a daily basis. Again, taking advantage of the FS Logic desktop. So I can log into all the different host pools I have here. I have the same desktop, the same icons presented here at the bottom. You can see here, I can take a look at remote desktop connections. I have some pinned ones up here that I take advantage of, as well as have my Chrome. You can see here, my Chrome bar is exactly the same how I like to have it. I have my extensions in here, which I find is key. I utilize LastPass, great program for making sure you have all your passwords memorized. Now, this one, sometimes the remote desktop systems have the trouble of actually utilizing Chrome extensions within here, but with FS Logic, we have the capability of providing that to each different person. So what I'm going to do here is I'm taking a look, looking for QuickBooks. I don't have QuickBooks here because it's not on the image. So I'm going to show you to log into a different image that I had presented to this company or to me. Well, let's sign out of this. While I sign out of that, I'm going to bring you up to the management level of what this looks like. So this is the management level of Azure Virtual Desktop that we'll be utilizing to support our clients. So there's a whole bunch of stuff here on the left-hand side. I won't go through all of it, but the key parts, again, is the desktop image, whatever is being presented to the user to be used on a daily basis. And the desktop image correlates to the host pools. The host pools are the servers that are distributing the image for use. So I have a couple different host pools here, Windows 11 and the QB1 I created. And each one has an auto scale capacity here for how we want to make sure that it scales up and scales down for the different users. So for the Ntiva QuickBooks, I can come in here, go to my auto scaling configuration, and see here again, this is just kind of a demo set. Probably wouldn't be set this low for just a regular business use, but I'm saying, hey, I want to make sure that as this is being used, I want to have active sessions checked on a minute scale of saying if it ever exceeds 2 active sessions, create a new system. So within a couple about 15 minutes, it'll create a whole new system ready to go once it exceeds 2. The cool part about it is once it exceeds 2, and you're waiting and playing around, and that one person logs off, it gets to a average use of 1, it will actually deprovision that system completely and take it right off the map. So you don't actually have to worry about it. So with the desktop system here, I can actually see I have the Windows 11 and QuickBooks, and I can come in here and take a look at how many servers I have running within the host pool. So I can click into the Ntiva QuickBook one. I can see here the sessions available. I have 1 server running right now. And if I take a look at my other host pools, I believe I have 2 running for my Windows 11 based on the rules I have. So with that said, I'm going to jump in and connect into my Windows 11, my QuickBooks one. Log into it. So that's going to be logging in. While that's logging in, I want to bring up another test system I have with other users. So I'm going to log him in. That one go. Log this one in. I have one more to go. I'll log this one off. Sign out. Great, so you're in. So I got a couple test ones going, and then I'll log into my other system right here. It's still booting up. I have a group policy for drive mappings, but what I'm going to show you here is when it's logging in, it's going to soon bring out and spin up another system to make it available, as well as spin down another one. So as I'm logging in here, I can see my host pools I have available. You can see here they had basically an auto start process. It's taking a look at the auto spoolings right here. I can come into the QuickBooks system and see beforehand, before I start off this, it's kind of removed a host because it went down past the capacity of the amount of users on it, as well as added a host when I surpassed it. And so here I am logged into the new system. And available on this is my QuickBooks, which I didn't have available. So this could be a new system I'm logging into, have access to that system. And now I have QuickBooks available to actually being used on that server. So you can actually go back and forth between it if I only want to have certain people have access to certain applications. And since this is a whole brand new system, you can see the key part again, like I said before, is how I have the same pinned items on remote desktop server. And when I come in and go into my Outlook toolbar or my Outlook, I'll have the same Outlook as well as the same Chrome extensions and Chrome bookmarks that I had before. So, and I have all the same shortcuts I had my LastPass ready to go, and I'm all set. And that has to do with the fact that I'm utilizing the FS Logix profile, taking it from server to server. This is a brand new system that I logged into, and I'm still working just the same as I was before. No difference at all, except for now I had the capacity to use the QuickBooks desktop. And the cool part about that with the QuickBooks, and just highlight a application. So QuickBooks, it has the ability, you need to update it. And so with the updating portions of it, you would come in here, come into the QuickBooks image, I'd power it on, do the update to the QuickBooks application. And once I get done with that, I'd come into my host pool and say, distribute that image. And so next time people log in, they'll grab the latest image with the updated QuickBooks application, and you're set to go. I'm just thinking about that for accounting purposes. You have a whole bunch of accounting applications out there. You got your CCH, Pro System Tax, your engagement, probably every single year of QuickBooks that ever been released, your Peachtree, all those applications need to be updated on a certain type of basis. And if you have multiple different remote desktop systems, if you're using RDS before, maybe you're coming from an on-prem where you get to update all these machines to make sure they're all set to go on the correct version, on the same version. Within this, you're just managing that one image, that you're basically updating that one image and pushing it to the host pool, and then it can populate all the applications for you on that business day, and you're set to go. You can even time it. So you do the update to the image during the day, log in, update all the applications so you're set during the day, and then time the distribution of the image to hit the host pool the next morning. So you can actually set it up. So, hey, I want to have, when everyone logs in at 8 in the morning, have that latest release of the software, so you're not interrupting the users in the business state that you need to have them log off or get it done. You can just do it right to the image and have it auto set to go. So those applications are set to be provisioned to the users at 8 o'clock in the morning when they log right on in. And I think that's going to be just about the end of the system, the end of the demo I have here. I have everything set. Host pools. And all set. Perfect. Well, great. Well, I think that's it I have for the demo today. Let me go ahead and bring up my slide, and I'll go ahead and go into any questions that you might have. So please feel free to use the Q&A section of this if you have any questions you want me to go over. Again, anything to do with this or anything to do with any of my past presentations, NCE, the Windows 11, as well as Outlook's tips and tricks. So far, no questions. So go ahead and give it another couple of minutes. is there a way to estimate the Azure bandwidth consumption converting from on-prem? There's really the Azure, if you get everything into AVD, the amount of Azure consumption bandwidth is very minimal. Really what you're doing is just sending video keyboard strokes and mouse movements up to the Azure Virtual Desktop, and then coming back down to you is just really just individual screenshots. And with that is basically whatever's changing on the screen is coming back and forth. So it's actually very minimal. I've been doing remote desktop systems, like I said, since 2003, and it's always kind of a big question of like how much bandwidth I'm going to use. And when you're using a remote desktop in the true fashion, where you're keeping everything within the remote system, Azure Virtual Desktop, VDI, or even the Windows 365, there's really not much actually traversing the network to make sure that you have the capacity to do your day-to-day basis. The neat part with, let's see if I can show it here, with AVD, let's see if I can bring it up. It's going to be on a different screen. I can bring it up this way, is they do have your quality connection you can take a look at. And they actually gives you a lot more information of what you're utilizing, your available bandwidth that you're taking advantage of at home, your frame rate consumption, the TCP protocol you're utilizing, you're using UDP or TCP, your round trip time, so you can see how it's taking impact for you. You can send in diagnostics. The other key part is the diagnostics you can do within Azure Virtual Desktop to see average bandwidth or average delays of being anything sent to any of the users. So you can try to see if there's any degradation service happening at the network side of it. But I find this very useful when trying to take a look at what's happening on each individual user's desktop and seeing what the capacity they're currently using. That's a great question, Bill. Thank you. Any other questions out there? Yes, yeah, absolutely can. Sorry, the question is, can you shadow user session and troubleshoot issues if using AVD? Yes, you can. There's multiple ways to actually do a shadow session. You can do a shadow session directly within Azure Virtual Desktop. I can see if I can bring up the management layer there. Okay. Oh, sorry, in my session here. So within here, I can see my user sessions. And then you can see here, here's the users I have running in my demo environment. Here's my account, user T Brown. I have shadow session right here. So I can actually come in here and shadow this remote session from this button and click into and get to it. Or potentially you can actually just remote into the person's PC and access it that way. So like I said, there's kind of multiple ways to actually shadow a user, see what they're experiencing at that time. Any other questions? Okay, but like I said, I'm very excited about this technology. I can't wait to be able to be the main use of remote desktop systems, how people are remoting into a remote environment. I really do think Azure Desktop is the way to go. Allows for more flexibility, allows to really make sure you can scale it up, scale it down to make sure it's functional for your business. Ability to have multiple different host pools for different aspects of your business. You can have, certain people have access to certain applications, or even certain thresholds of how it should be capacity and configured to each different group. So I think with those, like I said, it has the ability to be flexible and make it meld into what your current offering is or what you need to have to do your day-to-day functions. So please feel free to reach out to your account manager if you have any other questions with Azure Virtual Desktop or myself, or if you have any other questions, join my next webinar. We're going to be doing some some tips and tricks for teams. And again, like I said before, always happy to answer any questions on my previous webinars. So I thank you all for joining me today, and I look forward to talking to you all very soon in the future. Thank you so much. Bye.